Good morning, everyone. This weekend we begin a 4-week preaching series entitled Principles and Foundation of the Lay Commitment to the Common Good. So in case you haven't heard, we have an election coming up in which we will all have the opportunity to help shape the future of our country. In preparation for this, we've decided to give a series of homilies highlighting particularly relevant principles in Catholic social teaching that should help form the foundation of how we approach this and any election. It is daunting to go anywhere near politics in homilies, now more than ever. So it is with some trepidation that we begin this series. But we've had too many parishioners express to us how distraught they are about this election to simply say nothing about it. The Catholic Church has been around for a very long time, has seen the rise and fall of many societies and governments, and has a lot of wisdom and helpful guidance on how we as Christians should participate in the public life of our nation. In fact, this guidance is an essential part of the mission of the Church. So here's a quote from the Catechism, number 2246. It is a part of the Church's mission to pass moral judgments, even in matters related to politics, whenever the fundamental rights of man or the salvation of souls requires it. Now, in this series, we will not tell you who to vote for. You are all adult, hopefully mature Catholics. You're probably thinking, speak for yourself, Father Joe, you've got plenty of maturing to do. So you will have to make that decision for yourself. In fact, the Catechism says something about this too. In number 2442, it says, "It is not the role of the pastors of the Church to intervene directly in the political structuring and organization of social life. This task is part of the vocation of the lay faithful, acting on their own initiative with their fellow citizens. Their social action should always have the common good in view and be in conformity with the message of the gospel and the teachings of the Church." So, what the Catechism is saying is that it is your job as the lay faithful to vote with an informed conscience. An informed conscience is not just whatever feels right to you, and certainly not what seems right based merely on what your favorite political commentator is saying. Having an informed conscience means taking the time to be aware of the issues at stake and studying the teachings of the Church as they apply to those issues. And our role as pastors is to help form your conscience. And this is important not only because your votes will impact public policy, but also because one day each one of us will stand before God and answer for how we decided to vote this November. So first of all, do not leave your faith at the curb when you go to the voting booth. Faith infuses every aspect of our lives. All of the teachings of Jesus have clear implications on how we interact with each other in society. And since politics happens to have a great deal to do with social policy, our faith absolutely has a role in shaping this. So here's another Catechism quote from number 899. "The initiative of lay Christians is necessary, especially when the matter involves discovering or inventing the means for permeating social, political, and economic realities with the demands of Christian doctrine and life. This initiative is a normal element of the life of the Church." Now, there are many, many topics that could be covered in this series. I can already guess the sorts of angry emails we will receive for not talking about this or that particular social issue. So the starting point for these homilies is not specific issues such as human trafficking, racism, immigration, or tax rates. It's too easy to be subjective in deciding which of these topics to cover if you begin with the issues. Rather, the starting point for each of these homilies will be a particular core principle that helps form the foundation of the Christian approach to the common good. And from that foundational principle, then we will proceed to discuss some of the most obvious implications for our public policy today. If any of the topics covered in this preaching series seem to lean in the direction of one candidate over another, this is not the fault of the church's teaching, as if she were being partisan. The church's teaching on all of the topics that we will talk about has remained consistent for decades and even centuries, long before our country was even established. If any of our current politicians advocate for policies that contradict church teaching, this is not because the church is going after a particular platform or politician, but because those politicians have chosen to place themselves against the moral guidance of the church. Whenever and wherever this discrepancy is found, you should take it up with that politician, not with the church. So, with that lengthy introduction being said, let's get into the preaching series. There will be 4 homilies over the course of the next 4 weekends. The first homily today will be on the biblical worldview that shapes our political worldview. The second homily will be on affirming the dignity of human life. The third homily will be on defending the family, the basic unit of society. And the last homily will be on conscience and fighting for religious freedom. So today's homily on the biblical worldview. I think we can all agree that there are some problems in our country today. There are all sorts of opinions about how we should go about finding solutions to these problems. But in order to work towards solutions to the ills of our society, we must first understand what the illness is in the first place. And this is precisely where our Christian biblical worldview has something to say. At the heart of Scripture and our Christian faith, there is a story being told. A story about humanity, God, and the state of the world today. The story goes like this. In the beginning, God created life, earth, and the heavens, and all that they contain. Humanity was originally in a state of peace, tranquility, and deep union with God. There was no death, no suffering, no pain, no discord, no coronavirus. And this is what is clear if you go back to the very beginning of the Bible in the book of Genesis. Most incredible of all, humanity was given freedom, the single most God-like characteristic of all, freedom to love and freedom to sin. Our first parents, Adam and Eve, blew it. Tempted by the serpent, they misused this freedom to turn away from God and to choose sin. Because of their freely chosen actions, a profound rupture occurred in humanity's relationship with God. And this rupture in relationship brought with it some horrible consequences: suffering, illness, dysfunction, a perpetual inclination towards evil, and worst of all, death itself. We as Christians call this profound rupture in relationship with God sin. And ever since the fall of our first parents, every human being that has ever lived has been born into the effects of sin, except for Mary and Jesus, but that's another conversation. This is why in every age, in every society, in every country, there are problems with corruption, scandal, and even violence. Since humanity is fundamentally broken and still living with the effects of sin, wherever there are people involved, there will be problems. Now, I don't know about you, but even in my own anecdotal observations of life, I can certainly attest to this. Everywhere I go, whether that's with family or with parish staff or with a school or with friends, wherever there are people, there tends to be drama. There tend to be problems. Now, thankfully, this is not where the story ends. God, because He is so good, did not abandon us after the fall of our first parents, though He certainly had plenty of reason to do so. Rather, He set out on a beautiful plan of redemption, which culminated in sending us His own beloved Son, Jesus, to die for us, take our sins upon Himself, and open the way for us to be reunited with God as He originally intended. This reunion with God begins here, in this life, through the sacramental and communal life of the church, through the life of grace. But it is only completely fulfilled in the life to come in heaven. As a church, we strive for holiness every day, eagerly awaiting the return of our Lord Jesus Christ, when He will restore all of creation to its original holiness and union with God. Or, if we do not live to see the second coming, then we strive for holiness to prepare ourselves for the moment when we will stand before God at the time of our death and render an account for our lives. So this is the story at the heart of our faith. As a country, it is vital that we truly understand and internalize this story of our faith, this biblical worldview once again, because this story tells us the source of the problems in our society. The source of all the problems we face as a nation is sin. And unless we recognize the heart of the issue, we will never be successful in our efforts to resolve the problems we face. This biblical worldview explains why having many checks and balances in power in our government structure is so essential. No matter who is in power, there will always be sin involved because all human beings are born into sin. Hence, the best we can do is try to elect good politicians who will bring about good policies, but always place limits on their powers so that the sin and corruption they inevitably bring with them can at least be limited in its effects. The problem with some political platforms today and with other movements is that they are rooted not in this Christian biblical worldview, but instead in completely secular, atheistic, Marxist worldviews that deny the reality of sin. When we deny the reality of sin, we inevitably fall into grave errors in public policy and in government. So here's another quote from the Catechism, number 407. The doctrine of original sin, closely connected with that of redemption by Christ, provides lucid discernment of man's situation and activity in the world. By our first parent's sin, the devil has acquired a certain domination over man, even though man remains free. Original sin entails captivity under the power of the devil. Ignorance of the fact that man has a wounded nature inclined to evil gives rise to serious errors in the areas of education, politics, social action, and morals. So what is this secular worldview? Well, it goes something like this. You see, if sin is not real, then the problem is not internal in the heart of man, but it is external. It's in policy, it's in structures. And if sin is not real, then we just need to get the right people in power and remove any obstacles in the way of their policies, and then we can progress to a state of perfect equality, justice, and order. It sounds simple, right? If only it was that simple. Were it not for the presence of sin, then perhaps this plan could be possible. But because of sin in all of our hearts, whenever government is given too much power, those in control inevitably use their power for corrupt and even horrific ends. There are too many examples to cite in history of this error playing out in governments throughout the world. Just think of the atrocities that took place in Soviet Russia or in Cuba, or that continue to take place in communist countries like China, North Korea, or Venezuela. All of these places are run by socialist governments rooted in a flawed, secular, Marxist worldview that not only fails to resolve the problems of society, but even makes them worse. And all of this because this secular worldview fails to properly understand the human heart. So here's another quote from the Catechism, number 2425. The Church has rejected the totalitarian and atheistic ideologies associated in modern times with communism or socialism. Regulating the economy solely by centralized planning perverts the basis of social bonds. So the Church clearly supports free and open systems of economy. And there's so much more that could be said we don't have time for, but you could read John Paul II's Letters Centesimus Annus, especially paragraph 42. You could look at Pope Leo XIII's encyclical Rerum Novarum, paragraph 3. But in all these places, the Church does acknowledge that even these open systems of economy require certain checks and balances. So to go back to the Catechism, that same paragraph, it says that reasonable regulations of the marketplace and economic initiatives by the state for the sake of the common good are encouraged. In fact, Pope Francis has spoken of this in his encyclical Laudato Si. So yes, there are certainly dangers in a capitalist system as well, and this too because of the presence of sin and greed in all of our hearts. In the midst of the many problems we face as a nation, we hear a lot of talk about systemic problems and the need to tear down our current government and social structures. And if the secular Marxist worldview were correct, this response would make sense. The problems are all in the systems, the structures outside of us. And since our current systems still allow for corruption, inequality, and injustice to occur, then the very structures of our society must be thrown out. But the philosophical framework, secular Marxist worldview, upon which this approach is based, is deeply flawed. As I've said, because of the presence of sin, no matter what government structures are in place, there will be problems. Anyone who thinks we can eradicate inequality, injustice, and corruption solely by the government is not operating out of the Christian biblical worldview. Whenever a politician promises to solve all of the problems of our lives through far-reaching government intervention, we should be deeply suspicious. As an old saying goes, power corrupts, and absolute power absolutely corrupts. No one and no government should be given too much power over our lives because governments are filled with people just like you and me. People that are broken, fallen, and sinful. So, when you vote this November, consider the names on that ticket with this biblical worldview in mind. Ask yourself, is this candidate governing or planning to govern in a way that is consistent with the biblical worldview? This understanding of humanity is foundational to our pursuit of the common good and foundational to the faith that we live and believe as American Catholics today.